Hello, welcome to the program today. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here's what's coming up within the hour. Anti-ICE protests continue in Los Angeles, California, as police enforce a curfew. Austria begins 3 days of national mourning for victims of the shooting at the middle school in Graz. Plus, violence in Northern Ireland over a sexual assault allegation. Let's begin the world today. We're now in day 5 of the anti-ICE protests in Los Angeles, and amid neither security authorities nor the protesters appear to be backing down. Police imposed an overnight curfew and claim to have made arrests. Mayor Karen Bass says the curfew held within a relatively small area of the city's downtown district, saying businesses were being vandalized and looted. Elsewhere, the immigration raids that triggered the protests last Friday have continued, with deployed National Guard troops now protecting border control agents on enforcement operations. Trump's row with state officials ramped up after he deployed troops to LA. The president has now vowed to liberate the city, but has been accused by California Governor Gavin Newsom of assault on democracy. Speaking of the California governor, Gavin Newsom condemned President Donald Trump's deployment of the National Guard in Los Angeles, warning that it marks an assault against democracy. He further accused the U.S. of abandoning checks and balances. Congress, he says, is nowhere to be found. Speaker Johnson has abdicated responsibility. The rule of law is giving way to the rule of Don. Newsom has asked a court to emergency halt military support for federal immigration agents as guardsmen now protect ICE during protests. The unrest follows a wave of protests that erupted across Los Angeles over the weekend in response to a series of immigration raids carried out by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
This is about all of us. This is about you. California may be first, but it clearly will not end here. Other states are next. Democracy is next. Democracy is under assault before our eyes. This moment we have feared has arrived. He's taking a wrecking ball to our founding fathers' historic project. 3 co-equal branches of independent government. There are no longer any checks and balances. Congress is nowhere to be found. Speaker Johnson has completely abdicated that responsibility. The rule of law has increasingly been given way to the rule of Don. The founding fathers, they didn't live and die to see this kind of moment. It's time for all of us to stand up. Justice Brandeis, he said it best. In a democracy, the most important office, with all due respect, Mr. President, is not the presidency. And it's certainly not governor. The most important office is office of citizen. At this moment, we all need to stand up and be held to account, a higher level of accountability. If you exercise your First Amendment rights, please, please do it peacefully. I know many of you are feeling deep anxiety, stress, and fear, but I want you to know that you are the antidote to that fear and that anxiety. What Donald Trump wants most is your fealty, your silence to be complicit in this moment. Do not give in to him.
Well, we're getting updates now. Nearly 200 people have been arrested and were arrested overnight in Los Angeles. That's up from 27 people arrested on Saturday and 40 on Sunday and 104 on Monday. However, the current protests and crisis are not citywide in Los Angeles. There is anger at troops, especially the Marines, being brought in to patrol the streets. Our correspondent Maria Bird is monitoring things from Washington.
The state of California's Governor Gavin Newsom and Attorney General Rob Bonta are suing President Trump's administration, as the president authorized 2,000 members of the state's National Guard and just today an additional 700 Marines to protect against the immigration protesters in Los Angeles.
Things were quiet by the time the first National Guards people arrived in LA. They were quiet. Since then, they have not been quiet. So I'll let you conclude. whether the National Guardsmen that were called unnecessarily and unlawfully by the Trump administration contributed to, caused, stoked the flames.
President Trump responded to the lawsuit from California's government that claims the president is overstepping his federal authority and the U.S. Constitution.
Well, the biggest change from that statement is we have an incompetent governor. So I talked about governors, but I didn't talk about he's an incompetent governor. Look at the job he's doing in California. He's destroying one of our great states. And if I didn't get involved, if we didn't bring the Guard in, and we would bring more in if we needed it, because we have to make sure there's going to be law and order. You had a disaster happen.
While these raids are part of the president's campaign promises, they're creating tension between federal, state, and local governments. Former congressman and current mayor of Los Angeles expressed discontent with the recent actions.
As of now, we have not received words of raids. I think you all understand that the city is not notified when ICE goes to a workplace. And what we rely on, frankly, is reporting from the community, especially the immigrant rights organizations that have formed the Rapid Response Network. That is usually how we hear about a raid taking place. As far as we know, there might be one rally today, but we don't believe there's going to be a series of them, and we don't have a lot of information about that one rally. I do want to say that at 6 o'clock tonight, though, there will be an interfaith prayer vigil, of which I will be honored to attend.
While the governments are in a contentious battle, family members of detainees are shaken with grief.
What happened that day was a very traumatizing scene. I witnessed how they put my father in handcuffs, chained him from the waist and from his ankles.
Los Angeles enters its 5th day of the protests, and local governments are calling for an end to the raids. But federal governments appear not to be halting the raids anytime in the near future. From Washington, Maria Bird, Channel Television News.
Well, once again, President Donald Trump has defended sending in the National Guard into Los Angeles and even the Marines. He blames the state's governor for how things have deteriorated.
Can only go right by having the military. It de-escalates. I mean, that was the only way. These people are agitators. They're troublemakers. I believe many of them are paid. I watched them breaking up the sidewalks with a big hammer, handing pieces of the concrete to other people.
Who do you think is paying for that?
Somebody's paying for it. Thank you.
Might have something to do.
Thank you for saying that. Somebody's paying for that. I watched total professionals. He's banging the curb, banging the granite, banging the concrete. And he had a whole group of people. They lined up like totally professional, grabbed the big chunks, and they dropped it on the soldiers. They dropped it on the Los Angeles police. These are insurrectionists, they're agitators, or troublemakers. At a minimum, they're troublemakers. Well, I gave him, it wasn't a day ago, it was a little longer than that, and I presented the phone conversation to Fox News, John Roberts and Molly Line at Fox News, because they were the ones that said it. And we actually spent 16-point-something minutes on the phone, and I told him he's got to get his act together because you're going to have some bad times in Los Angeles if he doesn't. We had a pleasant conversation. The proof was from the phone company. It was from the phone company. So I spoke to him at a certain time. I'm sure you all saw it. You saw it. But why would you ask me that question if you saw it? You know, I mean, he asked me a question, and then he says, yeah, I saw that you spoke to him. Yeah, I spoke to him for over 16 minutes. And I told him to get his act together, but he hasn't been able to do that. I mean, the man, really, we could have a great, you know, we have an Olympics coming up. We have to put the right foot forward. We have to do a job.
Our correspondent Maria Bird is in Washington, from where she is monitoring more of the situation in Los Angeles. Maria, thanks for joining us at this time. And I guess the information about what really is going on in Los Angeles is quite fluid, but we're getting reports of the protests are not as widespread as is being reported in some media. Could you give us a clearer picture of what's happening on the ground?
Yes, well, the protests are pretty much confined to the area near the detainment center. And so it's just a few blocks really where the protests are happening. And as we can see, they have actually dissipated from what they were over the weekend. There are strategic rallies being planned. Obviously, there are loved ones of those who have been detained that are there still wanting to get more answers and information. But this is now really an approach that is focused on the strategic nature around ensuring that the raids are thought about and that the raids, there is more transparency into when raids and how raids are executed. And that local government is obviously leading the way on that, and local organizations as well. What we're really seeing that's widespread is the protests across the country. I think you all had mentioned Washington, New York, Chicago all saw protest around these ICE raids yesterday. So this is becoming a much larger piece than just Los Angeles. It's really around ICE raids that are spreading across the country. And this was kind of the catapult to identifying really that these are concerns of Americans, and Americans are beginning to protest against it. And so I think that what we'll see over the weekend is really how the federal and local governments will begin to work together to identify ways to address the widespread ICE raids.
So it is interesting that you point out all these other areas, and I must add Boston as well. There are protests against these ICE raids, that really does tell you, gives you a sense of the temperature in the country. Things are a bit heightened, and that's because of the raids, not necessarily because of the protests, right?
Correct. So that is kind of the foundation of this. The protests began because of the raids, and because the number of individuals that were in detainment centers. We know Los Angeles is strategically located very close to Mexico, the border there. And so oftentimes you have a larger number of individuals in major cities like Los Angeles, New York, Washington, and you will in other parts of the country of individuals who could be here illegally. But one of the greatest concerns is whether or not those who are being detained are all here illegally. And that is, I think, the number one concern for many of the protesters is the process in which people are being detained, actually what they're experiencing through that process of being detained. And so that's where the protests have started. I know you all have also shown footage of people vandalism to properties, and that's where the local government is beginning to step up into the state. As we know, there was a curfew put in place last evening in Los Angeles because they're saying, do not destroy the city because of your anger around the ICE raids. Let's think through this and let's not create any further damage than has already been done.
Now, some people have compared what's going on now with the period under former President Barack Obama and Joe Biden, saying that just as many people were deported during their administrations. The only difference is that they're not being as publicized as that of the raids that have been taking place under President Trump. How true is this?
Well, I think we'll have to look at the numbers. And the question is, in what period of time? We're talking about we are maybe 6 months into the new administration, and we've seen thousands of individuals detained, deported. And so the number of ICE raids and the execution of the way in which these ICE raids are occurring, I think, is the number one concern of many Americans. But as you said, was there deportation? Was there detainment? Were people removed from the United States because of their legal status here during the Biden and Obama administrations? Yes, definitely there were strategies put in place to address those issues. And the other concern I think many Americans have is how they're being executed. So the ICE raids are done in a way where people are being taken off of their jobs. They're being done in a way in which I think is a concern for the humanitarian issues, humanitarian rights issues, that potentially people are looking at how these are being executed. So that's more of the concern at this time. But this is not new as far as people being deported because of illegal entry into the United States.
The president yesterday talked about deploying the Marines. Have they arrived, and what exactly will be their purpose in Los Angeles?
Well, the Marines are going to be there in case there's further actions that need to be taken on behalf of the federal government to secure the safety of the officers. And so as the ICE raids continue, the concern is that they could experience violence from the community. And so the Marines are there to try to provide additional safety and security for those individuals and those officers. That was the initial intention. Now, they are not actually deployed. They are there, they're kind of surrounding the area, but they are not actively engaged at this time.
Indeed. The only ones engaged are just the local police in Los Angeles, because I understand the National Guard is only protecting federal buildings in Los Angeles area. And we understand the protests are not as widespread, just holding in certain areas. But this morning, Governor Gavin Newsom did, lash out at the president, accusing him of escalating the situation. He's talked about suing the president and suing the administration. Uh, what sort of position would that put him in with, the federal government?
Well, it's a challenging position, but as we know, that governors are there to protect their state, and that's a very interesting nuance about the structure in America. Is that governors and state officials are there almost as a check and balance for the federal government as well, and so they're voted on and elected by their constituents, not by the federal government appointments, and so because of that, they do have an obligation to the people of their state, to the welfare of their state. And that is exactly what he is executing. This is not the first time we've seen lawsuits by state to the federal government. This is something that has happened previously. And specifically, when you talk about what he is claiming that the federal government has done, which is overstep their bounds. Typically, the National Guard or any type of federal support is called in by the governor, or at least in collaboration with the federal government and governor. And this case, that is not exactly how this was executed. The federal government went forward with deployment before getting the consensus or being called on by the governor for this type of support. So that's what we're going to see kind of fall out throughout this court case. And of course, as you mentioned, does this put the governor specifically in a difficult position with the federal government and with the president specifically? Likely will. But the governor nor the president, I think, are concerned in those areas. They have seen these type of situations with each other before. And the state of California is Governor Newsom's primary priority.
Yes, and the president, just a while ago, we heard him talk about the situation in Los Angeles. He spoke about protesters breaking the coverts and using the bricks from that, against as weapons against the police, and that is concerning because there are those in Los Angeles who are not in support of these protests, who are calling for calm. They've shut their businesses and are not able to operate at all during this time. President Trump believes that there is a terrorism situation going on in Los Angeles. What do people say?
Well, he's considering domestic terrorism. And so the California government has not gone as far as to call this domestic terrorism. And so they believe that some of this has been heightened due to the influx of the National Guard being present. We saw what happened over the weekend. We saw those rubber bullets that were hitting individuals that were protesting and kind of the violence that ensued. And so that's, I think, where you see the president speaking of domestic terrorism is really around some of the violence that has, depending on which side of the aisle you sit on, that has ensued over the last few days. But I think most fundamentally, which will begin to come through the lawsuit that we'll see, is going to be around the way in which ICE raids are executed, how the federal government moves forward with these. And as we know, over the last 6 months, the federal government has moved forward with them without cooperation, sometimes from the local state governments as well. So that's kind of, I think, where we're going to see this moving forward over the next few days. And hopefully, as you've mentioned, there's a call for calm, there's a call for peace, and that those conversation discussions can move forward so that the people can see that movement is happening and that they will move to calm and peace in the communities.
Maria, just before you go, the president did talk about the Olympics coming up. I think that's in 2026. How concerned are authorities about how this will impact on preparations?
Well, obviously, any type of, I mean, we've seen it in the U.S. before when you have these type of large outbreaks. But as you mentioned earlier in the segment, you mentioned that this was a not as large spread as has been reported, right? It's pretty much a community, a local 3 to 4 blocks where these protests are outbreaking in Los Angeles. And so because of that, those businesses that are impacted will likely be able to recover pretty quickly. The Olympics in Los Angeles, I think, has been planned for quite some time. The governor has been very active in ensuring that LA is prepared for that through much of the construction that's ensuing across the city and actually across the state of California to support the Olympics. So there should not be much interruption with that over the next few days. And we should likely see that they will continue to be on schedule and continue to be prepared for the upcoming Olympics.
Everyone's looking forward to calm and things returning to normal in Los Angeles. Maria, thanks again for being with us today. We're off on a short break now on The World Today. Still ahead. Authorities in South Africa continue search for school children swept away by floods in stormy weather. Stay with us. Welcome back to The World Today. Not quite done yet with Los Angeles. Religious leaders have held a vigil outside the federal building, demanding the reunification of families and calling for peaceful demonstrations across the city. A curfew was scheduled to go into effect in the downtown area over the same day. This happened on Tuesday. Participants at the vigil prayed, carried flags from various countries as police formed lines outside the building and occupied nearby areas to maintain public order. Leaders of faith communities in Los Angeles have reportedly joined together with the clergy and laity, united for economic justice, to protest against violence by both law enforcement officials and anti-immigration protesters.
Pray. In your name we pray. Amen. Amen. Los Angeles, they want to see you get tired, but you will not get tired. You will stay non-violent. And so repeat after me and say as we move, I believe that we will win. That we will win. I believe that we will win. That we will win. I believe.
Imagine if it was my grandparents. Imagine if it was my family. Imagine if it was my students at my school that are undocumented, getting ripped apart from their parents. Like, that's just not right.
Austria has held a minute's silence for 10 people killed in a school shooting after thousands gathered for a candlelight vigil for the victims on Tuesday evening. Police said the 21-year-old suspect, a former student, took his own life in a school bathroom shortly after the gun attack in Graz on Tuesday, the deadliest in the country's recent history. In a statement earlier today, police said they found a farewell letter and a non-functional pipe bomb during a search of the suspect's home. Authorities have not confirmed the gunman's motive. The incident, which left a further 12 people injured, took place at a school in the northwest of the city. 6 females and 3 males were killed in the attack, and 7th female died later in hospital. Local news reported that 7 of those killed were pupils. 3 days of mourning have been declared in Austria, and a nationwide minute's silence held earlier today in memory of the victims. Graz's mayor has pledged the best possible support to friends, relatives, and others affected by the deadly shooting at the Borj school in the city on Tuesday. Police confirmed 11 people, including the shooter, were killed in the attack at around 10 in the morning. 6 females and 3 males were shot dead, and a 7th female died later in hospital. The Interior Ministry reported the suspect was only 21 years old. He was a former pupil who did not finish schooling and was believed to have killed himself in the school bathroom. 12 other people were injured, according to the media. They suggested bullying had been a factor, although the authorities did not confirm or deny any motives, saying that investigations are ongoing. Austria's Chancellor, Christian Stocker, described it as a national tragedy and a dark day for the country. And we're looking at the day of mourning starting today. The days of mourning started today for victims in the deadliest shooting, school shooting, that is, in Austria. There have been vigils holding across the country, of course, but mourners assembled in front of City Hall, where a black flag hung in mourning. Attendees were seen laying flowers and lighting candles at the memorial erected in the honor of those killed. Once again, this shooting happened around 10 in the morning at Borj School. Police confirmed 11 people, including the attacker, were killed. A 7th female was later pronounced dead in hospital.
It is not clear to us at the moment how this act came about. Graz is a very friendly, nice, unagitated provincial town, and such attacks are more likely to occur in cities with major social crises. Thank goodness they do not exist here. It is terrible for the pupils, it is terrible for the teachers, it is terrible for the parents, who for a long time did not know whether their child was alive or not. And I think it is very important that the cities stand together now.
Our neighbor is a teacher at this school, and yesterday he nearly lost his life. We were deeply affected by this incident. He now has to process what happened. It is terrible for the entire town. For those affected, it is a real catastrophe. We experienced something similar 10 years ago. It is simply awful.
We'll stay a little more in Austria. The Deutsche Welle correspondent Thomas Sparrow has been monitoring the situation from Germany. Thomas, what more do we know about the victim, especially, and about the alleged perpetrator?
It's a community in shock in Graz. It's a community in mourning, and it's shock and mourning that is also felt beyond Graz and beyond Austria, with several European leaders also showing their respects, also commenting on this very, very difficult situation. Especially difficult because some of the victims are said to be students from the school, especially difficult as well because the shooter was one of themselves, also a former student, a 21-year-old, who nevertheless did not graduate from the school and then shot himself in the school. So this is something that is sending shockwaves way beyond Graz, especially because these kinds of shootings are very rare, not only in Austria, but also broader in the European Union. And obviously, there are many questions now, on the one hand, about the potential motive. Apparently, a letter was also found, and authorities are trying to identify what could have been the motive. One of the hypotheses that is being discussed now is that the shooter saw himself as a victim of mobbing and then decided to carry out this attack in revenge. But this is something that authorities are still discussing. Meanwhile, Graz, Austria, and the European Union continue to mourn and continue to also discuss a potential response to what happened there in Austria.
And how often do school shootings happen in Europe?
If you compare them, for example, to the United States or to other countries, they are indeed rare. But there are several communities in Europe that in recent years have been affected by these kinds of shootings. But experts and analysts point out that it's not only about shootings that there is concern in Europe. It's more about knife attacks or other acts of violence in schools. There is, for example, a current situation in France where there was a knife attack in a school, and this is something that you also see in other countries around Europe, and that's why experts, that's why officials are specifically calling for more awareness on the issue, but also for a broader discussion on what needs to be done to secure schools as much as possible in the continent.
Thomas, before we let you go, we know that, these issues do raise questions such as how to better protect schools in Europe. So what are authorities saying?
There are absolutely suggestions on how schools could be better protected. Experts so far have mentioned awareness raising, which is something that already happens in many schools in Europe. So trying to raise awareness among teachers, among also other school officials, among students, and awareness raising also about what kind of potential signs could come from students that might then turn into violent acts in schools, whether it is a shooting or a knife attack or any other act of violence. So, for example, looking more carefully at how students use social media platforms, what kind of social media platforms use, what kind of social activities they have beyond that, any potential signs that could then lead up to a situation like that. That's one important element. A second important element is prevention. And a third one, which is now being discussed a lot in Austria and beyond Austria, is tightening gun laws, because one important element here was that the shooter had acquired those guns legally. So there's a big discussion now in Austria as to whether the country has laws that are lax and whether those laws should be tightened more, also in cooperation with other countries. In other words, whether the European Union should also do something to have more tighter gun laws in the continent.
I imagine this will be a big concern. Thanks again, Thomas. We go from school children in Austria to school children in South Africa who have been searched for by authorities. They were swept away by floods in Eastern Cape Province. Rescue efforts, which began yesterday, were halted overnight. The children were reportedly on their way to school in the town of Mthatha when the bus was carried away by flood as it was crossing a bridge. Eastern Cape Community Safety Official did claim a total of 8 bodies, including that of the bus driver, have so far been recovered. Other officials report that 3 students have also been rescued. However, it remains unclear how many pupils were on the bus, which has since been found on a riverbank with no one inside. President Cyril Ramaphosa, has expressed his condolences to the families of those who died, while urging citizens to display caution, care, and cooperation as the worst impacts of winter weather take effect across the country. Our correspondent in South Africa, Innocent Samosa, joins us now for a bird's eye view of the situation in South Africa. Innocent is in Cape Town. Thanks for joining us. Just give us a brief description, I guess, of what the weather is like currently in South Africa.
Yeah, a very good evening to you, colleague, and our viewers around the world. It's good to be alongside you. Indeed, a powerful cold front has brought snow, freezing temperature, and of course, dangerous conditions to several parts of the country, colleague. We do know now that the disaster management authorities have warned that the weather may turn deadly if communities are not adequately prepared. And we heard also, colleague, that in that part of the province or part of the country, as you rightly alluded to in your intro, the Eastern Cape Province, heavy snowfall and deadly collision in the N10. That is in the N10 next to Craddock. And we do know that that road now has been closed in the East London. Motorists using the N3 are also urged to be cautious as icy conditions persist. But elsewhere, colleague, in the and that is N2 highway has also been closed in the southern part of KwaZulu-Natal due to this severe snowfall. From Frozen Mountain, colleague, passes into the Eastern Cape to to Power Surge in Gauteng. The winter storm, I must say that it has had expressed the vulnerability of the infrastructure in the country and in some communities across the country. I can tell you now that it's freezing. It's very cold. I'm in Cape Town, but the issue with Cape Town, colleague, is that you can have 4 seasons in one day because the weather here is quite uncertain. So you have wind, you'd have cold, you have sun in one day. So, but today it has been really cold because we do know that the cold front started here in Cape Town. Amarachi?
Innocent. Unfortunately, these school children are the victims, of the current weather conditions in Cape Town. Just describe for us, the situation that the bus and the bus driver had to take these school children through. We understand it had been raining heavily in the eastern Cape community, and then the bus was taken away. Obviously, the driver lost control. I mean, in heavy rains like that and the floods, it is difficult to drive in those conditions.
Yeah, indeed, colleague. The issue here is that the roads are quite slippery, and the authorities have mentioned that motorists have to be cautious because it's quite icy and it's snowing. You can't really see the road. But the issue with the bus is that the investigations are still continuing. I don't want to purport or think this is or maybe allege because investigations are continuing as to what could have led to that tragic incident. And I heard you mention that it was 8 people. In fact, the number now has risen to 9 people in that particular province. And we do know that 11 children are still missing. So yeah, it's quite challenging time, and we do know again, colleague, that in Johannesburg, temperatures have plunged to zero levels, where the likes of City Power have said household cracking up heaters, and geysers have really pushed the grade to its limit. So we might find ourselves back to load reduction, not necessarily load shedding, but load reduction, because the grid is necessarily under pressure. But also in the Eastern Cape, colleague, the weather has had, upgraded to alert level 9. That is according to the South African Weather Services. They have upgraded the alert, which is now a yellow alert. So the premier there, that is Oscar Mabuyane, has also urged motorists to basically, follow safe following distance when they're driving. And he urged them to really exercise caution, exercise patience on the road, and of course, arrive alive. But I must say that again, it does speak to the infrastructure deficit in the country, where the drainage system is not really adequate to hold the water. That's why we find ourselves with these floodings, colleague. But I guess maybe this is a wake-up call to authorities to say that I think it's time for them to fix the infrastructure deficit in the country. But difficult times indeed, and condolences to the families of these children who have sadly passed away. Amarachi.
I honestly cannot imagine, the grief these families have to go through at this time. Innocent, just wondering. I know that you said the cold winds, the cold front has been experienced in all parts of the country. But my mind goes to Soweto, where there is abject poverty, and how that part of the country might be coping with the cold at this time.
Yeah. In fact, colleague, I'm glad you raised that because officials are urging communities members to stay indoors where possible to avoid, open flames, to stay up to date with weather dates or weather alerts for that matter, as the country battles this. But it's challenging, Amarachi, as you rightly alluded to, when you have poverty in that particular area where people cannot stay indoors, but they have to go and go to work. So it becomes a little bit challenging in that I guess there's a need for a provincial disaster management so that they can maybe set aside finances to really help these people, because we are likely to see more casualties if people, they don't have alerts, and they don't know where is rife with this cold winds. So it's really challenging. The likes of Soweto, the likes of Diepsloot, the likes of Alexandra. These are, communities that there's abject poverty. So, yeah, it does, again, a colleague, I would imagine this is a wake-up call to the leaders to say that there is that, inequality issue in the country needs to be nipped in the bud, with a matter of urgency, because it's not looking good at all, colleague.
Just wondering, Innocent, we do know that the weather changes in South Africa, just like it does in other parts of the world, because of the positioning of the country. It's, further south in Africa, as the name suggests. But this particular season, has it been experienced before? Because I know that South Africa has experienced, snowy conditions and, a drastic change in weather conditions a few times a year. But this particular condition, is it peculiar to this year?
Yeah, I think perhaps it's the issues that has to do with global warming, and I might be wrong here, but it's very cold this time around. It's unbearably cold. In fact, and there's a joke on social media, colleague, that the street kids were saying that they're going back home. They can't stand the cold. It's really cold, and I think it comes across as if you are in not even in Africa, for a lack of a better term, because we've never experienced this kind of coldness. But also, the weather services here in the country, it does seem as though it caught them by surprise, because we got the alert very late. And
Right.
it seems impossible for people to prepare for it, because it does seem as though it caught them by surprise. And I don't know whether or not their machines failed them, but this is the first time that we're experiencing a very much cold weather, and where it's snowing in more than 3 provinces in the country. So it's indeed very cold, colleague.
Innocent, thank you. Despite the weather conditions, you have successfully carried on this interview, without chattering your teeth or asking for a cup of coffee. Do stay as warm as you can. We'll get back in touch with you at another time. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
We're off on another break on The World Today. Still ahead. Well, how much do you love the Pope? Well, this is all a new level to a lot of people in Peru, but it's all for a good cause. Stay with us. Welcome back to The World Today. In Northern Ireland, police came under attack for a second night as protesters threw petrol bombs, bricks and fireworks, injuring 17 officers and leading to 5 arrests. Officers fired baton rounds and used a water cannon to disperse protesters as cars were set on fire and windows of several houses were smashed. The unrest began on Monday after a peaceful protest over an alleged sexual assault in the country, and the town itself became violent. Well, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer joined Northern Irish authorities in condemning what he called 2 nights of mindless, racially motivated violence targeting foreigners. As mentioned earlier, the arrest that has injured 17 officers, civilians, and homes and businesses attacked. Northern Ireland's leaders issued a joint statement today warning against a destructive minority pushing a divisive agenda.
we've sanctioned individuals responsible for inciting appalling settler violence and expansion. We've done that to uphold human rights and defend the prospect of a two-state solution. We will continue to support all efforts to secure a ceasefire, the release of all hostages despicably held by Hamas, and the humanitarian aid that needs to surge in. We've put record investment in our NHS and our public service, record investment. And she comes every week to carp on about national insurance, but she doesn't stand there with the courage of her convictions and say she'll actually reverse it. And the reason she won't, because she won't stand up and say she's against the investment in the NHS, she won't stand up and say she's against the investment in our public services, and we'll all listen very carefully in just 20 minutes when the Chancellor lays out more record investment as to whether they welcome it or whether they say they wouldn't support it. Mr. Speaker, Diego Garcia is a vital intelligence and strategic capability, and it's absolutely clear that legal uncertainty would compromise it in very short order. That is why they started the negotiations in relation to it, and no responsible Prime Minister would let that happen. But it is complicated, and there are a lot of countervailing factors that need to be carefully balanced in a decision that can be made. We are talking to allies about it, but I don't want to pretend to the House that there's an easy answer on this, because there isn't.
Here in Africa, in Kenya, dozens of activists were out on the streets early today, marching against the blogger Albert Ojwang's death. The rally follows the autopsy revealing Ojwang suffered internal injury while in police custody. Activists want justice for his family.
Following the autopsy that we've just done for 5 of us,
we want to see our judiciary in action. Let us not leave any stone unturned. And also to the Director of Public Prosecutions, we want to see you also reviewing the proper charges so that we can hold these individuals that have gone wrong to be held accountable. You cannot expect the people of Kenya to trust in this government, in this National Police Service, if they cannot get justice. We want to see justice for this family.
nahitaji unieleze kwa nini ulimuua mtoto wangu. Kupitia kwa sheria, ukaseme kwa nini ulimuua mtoto wangu. Alikukosea nini ambayo inagharimu kifo chake. Watu wanaongea kuhusu mambo ya ufisadi, hata ni wengi kabisa katika nchi hii yetu. Kwa nini mtoto wangu peke yake asulubiwe kwa ajili ya neno la ufisadi?
And as we end the world today, love for Pope Leo XVI has been taken to a new level in Peru as the Diocese of Chiclayo has teamed up with a local ice cream shop to create the Papeleta, a white chocolate ice cream bar featuring an image of the Pope. In the true spirit of Christian charity, proceeds from the sales of this delicious treat aim to support more than 30 vulnerable children at a local school. According to the owners of the ice cream shop, the social project was originally proposed by then Bishop of Chiclayo, Monsignor Robert Prevost, who is now Pope Leo XVI. 14th. The project focuses on providing educational support to children from the Santa Ana area in the district of Jose Leonardo Ortiz. 20% of sales from the ice cream bars will go towards setting up a space in the San Juan Apostle Parish, which will be equipped with reading materials, tutoring sessions, as well as fun and engaging reading activities. That's one more reason to indulge in the tasty treat. Thanks for watching The World Today. I'm Amarachi Ubani.